the same physical principles. So this comes from the high magnetic field. So in the end, like why does this matter? What it does is it does those things, and it should get to the point where it's producing over 100 million watts of fusion power. But remember, it's 40 times smaller. So ITER was 500 megawatts. Technically, our design is around 150 megawatts, so it's only about a factor of 3 difference, despite being 40 times smaller. And we see QP large, order of 10 or something like this. At that state is very important scientifically, because this is basically matches what ITER is looking to do. The plasma is dominated by its own heating. It's very, very important. And it does that for about 10 seconds. And the reason it's for 10 seconds is that in terms of that basically allows everything to settle in terms of the fusion in the plasma equilibrium. Everything is nice and settled. So you have seen the physical state at which you would expect a power plant to operate basically for magnetic fusion. Like, wow, right? Mm-hmm. But it's more than that. And it's more than that. It's because about who's building it and why and how it's being financed. Mm-hmm. So that scientific pathway was made possible by the fact that we had access to a next generation of magnet technology. So to explain this real quick, why do we call it, you said it in the words, a superconducting magnet? What does this mean? Superconducting magnet means that the materials which are in the electromagnet have no electrical resistance. Mm-hmm. Therefore, when the electric current is put into it, the current goes around unimpeded. Mm-hmm. So it could basically keep going around and around, technically for infinity. And what that means, or for eternity. And what that means is that when you energize these large electromagnets, they're using basically zero electrical power to maintain them. Whereas if you would do this in a normal wire, like copper, you basically make an enormous toaster oven that's consuming enormous amounts of power and getting hot, which is the problem. That was the technical breakthrough that was realized by myself and at the time my students and postdocs and colleagues at MIT, was that we saw the advent of this new superconducting material, which would allow us to access much higher magnetic fields. It was basically a next generation of the technology, and it was quite disruptive to fusion. That namely, what it would allow, that if we could get to this point where we can make around 20 Tesla. We knew by the rules of tokamaks that this is going to allow us to vastly shrink like the sizes of these devices. So it wouldn't take, although it's a worthy goal, it wouldn't take a 7-nation international treaty basically to build it. You could build it with a company and a university.
So same kind of design, but now using the superconducting magnets.
Yeah, and if you look at if you just expand the size of it, they look almost identical to each other, because it's based on and actually that comes for a reason, by the way, is that it also looks like a bigger version of the tokamak that we ran at MIT for 20 years, mm-hmm. where we established the scientific benefits, in fact, of these higher magnetic fields. So that's the pathway that we're on. So we say, so what does this mean? The context is different because it's primarily being made by a private sector company spun out of MIT, mm-hmm. because the way that it raised money and the purpose of the entity which is there is to make commercial fusion power plants, not just to make a scientific experiment. This is actually why we have that's why we have a partnership, right? Is that our purpose at MIT is not to commercialize directly, but boy, do we want to advance the technology and the science that comes along this, and that's the reason we're sort of doing it together.
So it's MIT and Commonwealth Fusion Systems.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to say about financing? And this seems like, from a scientific perspective, maybe not an interesting topic, but it's perhaps an extremely interesting topic. I mean, you can just look at the tension between SpaceX and NASA, for example.
Yes.
It's just clear that there's different financing mechanisms that can actually significantly accelerate the development of science and engineering.
It's great that you brought that up. We use several historic analogs, and one of them is around SpaceX, which is an appropriate one because space, putting things into orbit has a minimum size to it, and integrated technological complexity and budget and things like this. So, our point when we were like talking about starting like a fusion commercialization, company, people look at you like, isn't this still really just a science experiment? But one of the things that we pointed to was SpaceX to say, well, tell me like 25 years ago how many people would have voted that the leading entity on the planet to put things into orbit is a private company.
Yeah.
People would have thought you were not so, right? It's like, and what is interesting about SpaceX was that it proved it's more than actually just financing. It's really the purpose of the organization. So the purpose of and I'm not against public finance or anything like that, but the purpose of a public entity like NASA correctly, speaks to the political, because the cost comes from the political, assembly that is there, and I guess from us eventually as well too. But its purpose wasn't about like making a commercial product. It's about fundamental discovery and so forth, which is all really great. So like, why did SpaceX? It's interesting. Like, why did SpaceX succeed so well? Is because the idea was, it's like the focus that comes in the idea that you're going to relentlessly like reduce cost and increase efficiency is a drive that comes from the commercial aspect of it, right? And this also then changes the people in the teams which are doing it as well too, and in fact trickles throughout the whole thing, because the purpose isn't, while you're advancing things, like it's really good that we can put things in orbit a lot more cheaply. Like, it advances science, which is an interesting synergy, right? And it's the same thing that we think is going to happen in fusion. That namely, this is a bootstrap effect. That when you start to push yourself to think about near-term commercialization, it allows the science to get in hand faster, which then allows the commercialization to go faster, and up we go. By the way, we've seen this also in another. Again, you have to watch out with analogies, because they only can go so far. But like biotech is another one. Like, you look at the Human Genome Project, which was, it's sort of like, to me that's like mapping the human genome is like that we can make net energy from fusion. Like, it's one of those like in your drawer that you go, this is a significant achievement by humanity, right, in this century. And there's the Human Genome Project, fully government funded. It's going to take 20, 25 years, because we basically know the technology. We're just going to be really diligent, keep going, and then all of a sudden, what comes along? Disruptive technology, right? You can sequence, shotgun sequencing and computer, recognition patterns, and basically, oh, I can do this 100 times faster. Like, wow, right? And so that's really the to me, that the story about why we launched Commonwealth Fusion Systems was more than just about another